Ted Cruz is attacking anybody that's not willing to shut down the government over Obamacare. He's lambasting fellow conservatives like Tom Coburn.
Wait a minute. You don't do
and
that.
saying that he serves in the, quote, surrender caucus.
Joe Scarborough today on Morning Joe went on a tear against Mike Lee, Senator Tea Party from Utah, and Texas Senator Ted Cruz for this threat of shutting down the government and coupling that with the defunding of Obamacare. Joined, by the way, in criticism by Karl Rove, and this was said by Charles Krauthammer last night on Fox News.
Unless you believe that you are ready to shut down the government, unless you're ready to deliver on the threat, you don't go near there. And we know that every time Republicans in opposition have threatened to shut down the government, they've had to blink because it turned against them.
Joining us now, the aforementioned Senator Ted Cruz from the great Lone Star State of Texas. Senator Cruz, you have a way of making a lot of friends up there.
Well, Laura, it's great to be with you, and I will confess it does keep me up at night that Morning Joe doesn't consider me his favorite person.
Well, what's at the bottom of all of this? Because Heather Higgins is a good friend of mine. She's done the Repeal the Pledge website. She's really, really smart on strategy and so forth, and we were just talking the facts. And look, my instinct, of course, is to choke everything off of the federal government. Okay, that's my move and just take the money away from Washington, take the power away from Washington as best as we can. But the concern here is what Krauthammer really said. We saw this last time, the threat to and then it related to the debt ceiling. But on this particular issue, Republicans never really will shut the government down, and it always ends up biting them in the what.
Well, I agree that if you look at past instances where Republicans have stood up, we have usually surrendered and given up. But I think the lesson to be drawn from that is not never fight. It's stop surrendering on issues that matter. And let's take Obamacare, because that's obviously the central topic here. And how do we stop Obamacare? Every Republican politician likes to tell their constituents they're opposed to Obamacare. There are a couple of undeniable facts. Number one, Obamacare isn't working. It's getting bipartisan criticism. The American people don't like it, and the wheels are coming off. It is more vulnerable now than it has ever been. But number two, and this is the critical fact that all of those critics who are throwing rocks at me have yet to respond to with anything persuasive. If we don't stop Obamacare now, Laura, we never will. And the reason is simple. On January 1st, the exchanges are going to kick in, and the subsidies are going to kick in. And the Obama administration's plan is very simple. They're not hiding it. They want to get as many Americans as possible addicted to the subsidies, addicted to the sugar, because they know the simple fact that in modern times, no major entitlement has ever been implemented and then unwound.
Right, but Senator, the problem is Coburn's point on this is that the government shutdown won't affect Obamacare at all. I mean, he put out this memo, late yesterday, that it won't shut down Obamacare because the mandatory spending isn't affected by annual appropriation bills. So that makes the argument seem silly.
No, Laura, what's silly is actually that argument. I have never said that a government shutdown would defund Obamacare. What should happen is the following. The House should pass a continuing resolution that funds all of the federal government except for Obamacare, and they should explicitly prohibit funding Obamacare. Now, I filed legislation that prohibits funding Obamacare, both discretionary and mandatory. If my legislation gets passed as part of the continuing resolution, it stops all the funding. It stops discretionary. It stops mandatory. It defunds it in its entirety. Now, Senator Coburn's of course right that doesn't take effect unless we pass it. But the whole point of this fight is we need to pass it. And this is the fight if we pass the legislation to defund Obamacare. And you know well, the most important constitutional check that Congress has on an overreaching executive is the power of the purse. And what we have been doing so far is passing lots and lots of symbolic votes where we all vote against Obamacare, pat ourselves on the back, and say, well, that was fun. It has no chance of happening. With the continuing resolution, in 61 days, on September 30th, the continuing resolution that funds the federal government expires. That is, I believe, the best leverage point. Now, Krauthammer is, of course, right. If we're going to fold, we'll lose this fight. The lesson I derive from that, though, is not simply surrender and say we will allow Obamacare to be a permanent feature of our economy. It is, for once in our life, let's have Republicans listen to conservative grassroots, stand up and defend principle, and go win the argument.
Well, I like the resolute, approach in many ways. I mean, a clear and defined approach to this issue, which is, as you said, it's a big winner, and it's a winner across party lines. But sometimes strategy is a little different, right? I mean, sometimes the strategy does require a bit of nuance. I think you get what I'm saying. So if it ends up looking like, okay, these guys, cowboys coming in, they're threatening to shut it down, and they're calling people like, Tom Coburn, a committed, legislator, committed senator, who's committed to shrinking the size of government. Then you're starting this kind of needless intra-party fight where we don't need it on this because we have such agreement on this issue. That's the criticism. Civil War.
Let's be clear on the intra-party fight. I have not said an ill word about any of my colleagues. Quite a few of them.
The surrender caucus. What's the surrender caucus? That's pretty nasty.
I did not say that about anybody. And I have not said an ill word about...
What's your chief of staff? What's your chief of staff? I mean, he's speaking as your proxy, is he not?
No, he actually was not. He did that on his own, and I didn't know about it. And I don't agree with that, and I have not said an ill word about any of my colleagues. They have used some pretty nasty language about me, but my approach is not to reciprocate, and I don't intend to. I think Tom Coburn is a good man, and he is entitled to his own views on what the best strategy is. A question I would suggest to you whenever you're talking to those who are explaining why this approach doesn't make sense is to ask the simple question, what's your alternative? If it's right that if this goes into effect on January 1, we will never, ever, ever get rid of it, what is your alternative? Because I've sat in endless meetings where people say, well, no, we can't do this. Is there any other way to defeat Obamacare? Well, no, but we can't do this.
Well, doesn't Heritage Foundation have an approach that's a little bit different from yours? I mean, I think they put out a strategy memo that has some interesting thoughts.
Heritage's approach is identical. It's identical to mine. In fact, I spent about an hour over at Heritage doing a briefing with bloggers. I mean, in terms of the strategy, Laura, you and I have known each other a long time. I mean, I am not one who does anything that's rash, and I'm not one... Look, I don't think you should fight everything. If you fight everything, you're getting nothing done. I think you should prioritize. You should pick fights that matter. And in my view, if we're not willing to fight on this, on Obamacare, the most damaging piece of legislation in the country, it's destroying the economy, it's destroying jobs, it is hurting our health care system. If we're not willing to fight on this, what the heck are we doing? And no one else has proffered an approach. I mean, how do we win? Let me walk through a simple timeline of how we win.
Yeah, because you have to get some Democrat support to win, right? I mean, you can't just do it with Republican votes. So that's the point. So since you can't get that Democrat support, all the principled stance, and again, on the principle, of course, you and I agree on this. I mean, I want this thing gone. I mean, this is ridiculous. But people like Byron York saying, look, we had a chance to defund Obamacare, a real chance. It was 2012. Fortunately, we ran Mitt Romney, and he couldn't seal the deal because of Romney care, whatever. So that's his point.
Laura, I believe this is a fight we can win if, and this is all we need, is 41 Republicans to stand together in the Senate or 218 Republicans in the House. And here's what we do. It would start with the House passing a continuing resolution funding the entire federal government except for Obamacare, prohibiting any funding for Obamacare. The next step, we've seen this play before. Barack Obama, Harry Reid would scream, those mean, nasty Republicans are threatening to shut down the government. And then we actually have to do what we haven't done in the past, which is stand up and win the argument, go out and say, no, we have voted to fund the government. We want to fund the government. Why is Barack Obama threatening to shut down the federal government in order to force Obamacare down people's throat? He just granted a waiver to large corporations. Right. Why will he shut down the federal government to deny hardworking American families the same waiver he's giving giant corporations? And then we have to go win that fight. And when I listen to these strategy discussions, look, you'll have an impasse there. Mm-hmm. And I think it is certainly a real possibility that the Democrats will force a temporary partial government shutdown.
And who's going to be blamed for that? Who's going to be blamed for that, do you think?
Well, we have to be effective making the argument. I mean, that depends on effective communication. I will say this. We have tools that were not there in 1995. And let me just take a detour for a second. An awful lot of politicians in Washington, I think, are haunted by the ghost of shutdowns past. They remember the 95 shutdown, and it terrifies them. I actually think that the conventional wisdom in Washington gets the 95 shutdowns entirely wrong. In the winter of 1995, Republicans in Congress stood up to Bill Clinton. There were two shutdowns, and there are a couple of lessons we can derive from it. One, the world didn't end, this sort of calamitous picture that is painted. Planes didn't fall from the sky. Social Security checks kept coming.
We ended up losing a bunch of seats in 96, though, right? I mean,
we didn't. No. But let's talk substance first and then politics. On substance, the military was continued being paid. The debt interest payments continued being made. What happened in the temporary partial government shutdown is non-essential government services were temporarily suspended, which, by the way, happens every single week on the weekend, on Saturday and Sunday. Now, that's not a long-term sustainable position, but it's also not this horrible end of the world. And as a result of that, I mean, if you want to evaluate that shutdown, you got to look at what the upside was. Because Republicans stood for principle and were willing to do that, we saw year after year of balanced budgets come out of Congress. We saw some of the most fiscally responsible policies Congress has ever produced.
No, on the substance, you're 100% right, and it's just like
and
the
if
sequester.
We hadn't done that, we wouldn't have gotten any of that.
No, I got you. And the sequester as well. All these things were threatened. The sky was going to fall. None of that happened. The sequester. None of that happened.
And let's talk about the political piece, because you said, well, we lost a bunch of seats, and that's one of the things all the consultants in Washington say. They need to go back and read their history books a little more closely. In the next election, 1996, Republicans held on to the majority in the House. The first time Republicans had done that since 1930. In 66 years, we lost a total of 9 seats in the House. In the Senate, we gained 2 seats.
2 seats, yeah.
So this story that the electoral results were calamitous, the Senate gained seats.
Senator, you're absolutely right on that. And just, I know you have to go, you have to run, but there's one more question on this Obamacare defunding, and I'm really doing this for informational purposes. I haven't staked out a big position on this. Again, just with strategy. The concern, I think, is that the full defunding of Obamacare, as I presently understand it, if that's going to be the opening bid, does that then not hurt your ability to continue this consensus on pulling back on parts of Obamacare, where we're actually making common cause with Democrats? So it's too inflexible when you have a non-negotiable position. That's kind of an interesting position.
Laura, the problem with the so-called Republican strategy on pulling back parts of it is none of it will succeed. The Democrats aren't going to go along with any of that.
Then why would they go with full defund if they're not going to go along with partial?
Because on the continuing resolution, we have the leverage. Their alternative is to shut down the government. And it is my view that in a temporary partial government shutdown, that is more painful for Democrats than it is for Republicans. That's a situation where, I mean, what drives me crazy is in these discussions, I have all these colleagues of mine who say, well, Obama will never blink. And I say, why do you operate from the assumption that he will always stick to his principles and so therefore we have to abandon ours? On this, we're with the American people. But let me say this. We cannot win this fight if traditional Washington rules apply, if it's just there's no elected official who can win this fight. I can't win this fight. Mike Lee can't win this fight. Marco Rubio can't win this fight. No Washington politician can. Only the American people can. And that's why there's a national website don'tfundit.com, don'tfundit.com. What needs to happen in the next 61 days, if this is going to happen, is hundreds of thousands or millions of Americans need to go to don'tfundit.com, sign the petition, call their representatives, call their senators, and say, stop giving speeches on Obamacare, stop claiming you're opposed to Obamacare, stand up and defund it now, because if you don't, we are surrendering and it will permanently remain with us. And that's the final thing I'd urge you, Laura. Right. Anyone else you're talking to, ask, okay, what's your plan to successfully stop it before January 1? Because there is no alternative other than those who are urging we should keep giving speeches and just leave it where it is.
Senator Ted Cruz, we really appreciate your spending so much time with us, and I know you're devastated of losing Joe Scarborough. We really appreciate it. Senator Cruz, thanks so much.
Thanks, Laura. Take care.
And coming up, your thoughts on what Senator Cruz said. Should the GOP shut the government down over Obamacare if that's what's required? Don't go away.
The Laura Ingraham Show.
Thanks for listening to this podcast excerpt of The Laura Ingraham Show. If you'd like to receive podcasts of our complete shows, go to lauraingraham.com and sign up to become a member of Laura 365. Our Laura 365 members get commercial-free streams and podcasts of our shows every day we're on the air. And also, you can listen to the last 30 days of The Laura Ingraham Show. Be ahead of the curve. Join Laura 365.